Welcome to the Riff. Today on the Riff, Jeremy and Justin wrestle with some thoughts, like maybe our role is to love people, and Jesus can take the transformation part. We hope today is helpful. Thanks for listening.
Hello, Riff listeners and Riff watchers. We are excited to be coming at you today. And Justin, as we start this off, I've got to share something that someone presented me with this last couple of weeks. I was out and about in the community, as I do.
As you do.
And someone said that they listened to our Riff in South Africa.
What?
Yeah.
No.
And now they're from Republic.
Doesn't matter.
Okay, but they listened in South Africa. And I think it's a safe leap to assume that maybe other South Africans were overhearing this and started listening. And so here's my new commitment to our new listeners here in South Africa. We are going to bring a lot more examples, illustrations of rugby than we have, football than we have.
Right.
And man, we're excited, isn't it so, God, to expand what we thought. Remember when we were just meeting in this old Baptist building in this little studio?
That's right.
Little did we know, as the dominoes fall, that global leaders are listening to us today. And I inherently believe everyone's a leader. So,
right.
I think that's a true statement.
Mustard seeds.
Humble.
Mustard seeds.
Yeah.
That's all that is.
Won't he though?
That is all.
It's just, yeah. And so today, and I don't want to be different, right? I want to be the same guy that got us here.
For sure.
And so here's what I make a new commitment, a fresh commitment to you, Riff listeners, Riff viewers.
A Riff Raff.
Those of you who just got done with a rugby scrum, fresh from the pitch. I just want you to know that we're going to continue being faithful to the mission. We're here. We're just a couple, honestly, we still remember what it was like to be a couple of people
guys
who weren't global.
I know.
Right?
Well,
Two regular
it's
guys.
Hard to remember, but I do.
No. Yeah. So,
man.
Anyway.
Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome. How are you?
I'm so good. How are you doing?
I'm glad you're good, and I'm good too.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's glad as a feeling. Is glad a feeling?
I feel it.
Oh, okay. All right.
Happy. I'm happy.
You're happy.
Would that be better?
Yeah, that's better.
Which, when I feel happy, that makes me glad.
Okay.
Does it?
I think it's reverse.
When I feel glad, that makes me happy?
Makes you happy. Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. Love is a secondhand emotion.
For real?
Yeah, I heard it.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, we're 3 minutes in.
That's so great because usually we have 27 minutes of content, but 30 minutes of pressure.
Right.
And so now we can just go content. So
speaking of content, listen, we've talked about a couple of things, and you said right before we started recording, you then said you choose.
And as soon as I said, Justin, you choose the direction we're going today, I got to tell you, I got butterflies in the tummy.
I bet.
But as I was told by my 7-year-old soccer coach, not that a soccer coach is 7-year-old, but when I was 7 years old and had a soccer coach.
You mean football?
Football coach,
South Africa.
Football coach. When I was still in the FIFA world, it's all right to have butterflies, just make sure they fly in formation.
Oh, that is good.
Yeah, it's good.
That's a shirt right there.
That is a shirt.
Yeah.
This one particularly?
I'd say so.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So where are we going? We're gonna talk about. Are you ready?
What are we talking about? I'm not ready, but it's called the Riff. So the prerequisite is not for me to be ready for us to have an episode here.
We are going to talk about one of our most famous campus pastors.
Okay. All right. Are you talking about Andy Thornton?
No, but it isn't Andy. But I do like me and Andy Thornton. He's a good campus pastor.
Andy Thornton is a great campus pastor.
I'm talking about Andy Stanley.
Andy Stanley.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if he works for us. He works for North Point as a whole, right? We're kind of all one family. I mean, we don't really talk to one another, right? But
I mean, it's been a while.
Yeah.
It's been a while. But yeah, Andy Stanley, North Point, Atlanta. Which, side note, if we're launching a church and there's already a mega church called North Point, I don't know.
I know.
As a matter of fact, I called an emergency board meeting once, early on in my tenure here, about let's change the name.
What did you want to change it to?
The Other Side. Because we were about ready to launch a series called The Other Side.
Yeah.
And I was so excited. I wanted to change the name of the church. Yeah. That's how excited I get about series, which I'm so glad we didn't name it Happy New Year Church, right? But every series we do, I get that excited about a series.
Wow.
And so it was going to be The Other Side. And I was like, well, there's already like a huge, like one of the biggest churches on the planet is North Point. And it's geographical in name too, which isn't great for multi-site. But bottom line, Andy Stanley, North Point.
Andy Stanley.
That's why we always had to say North Point Mo on the app.
I know. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, that's all right. And what did Andy do this time?
Well, he's done a lot of things, right? He's in the news a lot.
He's in the news a lot. Yeah.
He's in the news because he's very much a mission guy, right? Like he walks through it very well. But he's in the news. He had a little bit of a conference, a little bit of some talking, a little bit of some preaching that walked through LGBTQ within the church.
Yeah.
And
he was taking some shots.
Ruffled some feathers. So I want to see
a lot of what we would call church feathers.
A lot of church feathers.
A lot of church people wanted to defrock him. That's the thing. That's the thing.
Do we have
That's saying you're unfit for ministry.
Do we have to censor that?
No.
Okay, so we can let that go?
Defrock him.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. That's the thing. That's all saying, hey, that's the modern day burning you at the stake because you're a heretic is what people were thinking. So.
All right, so I want to walk through that.
Yeah, let's walk through it.
I want to walk through just kind of your take on those pieces, and you can kind of fill us into things that you've watched, seen, heard, whether it be from him or from other people that have talked about him.
Yeah.
Which is my favorite when people talk about someone and haven't either watched it or read it. One of my favorite things. That's awesome. Yes. It's really cool. It's really cool. Yeah. So what have you seen, heard? And what's your take?
Okay, let me say why I think this is a fascinating and appropriate conversation for the Riff, and then I want you to kind of give us a little set the context of what had happened.
Okay,
and then we'll just riff on it. So one of our desires for this, why we even have a podcast, and like for real, we have these conversations of do we continue to record Riff episodes because it's not because we want more opportunities. Matter of fact, the only reason we do this is we think there's some valuable resources, stories, just information that we don't either have time for on the weekend or it's just not the best setting because of our target audience on the weekend. And so we assume Riff listeners at some level are connected to North Point as a general rule. And not that all are, but we need to have a venue where we're just talking to North Pointers behind the scenes. It might be helpful to outside North Pointers as well, but that's what this is. I think it's a great conversation because, again, as we get into this, our mission, we'll talk about our mission. I think it's a missional thought, it's a missional conversation, and it might even be a missional conversation of why we don't have it necessarily on a weekend. So let's talk about the context. What happened with Andy? Give us his best context, and I'm familiar with it.
Yeah.
We've talked about this.
Yep.
I've watched all this and read about this, and so share with me any context. I'll fill in whatever from my perspective as well, and then we'll riff on it.
Yeah, he's through the years, he's had different moments where he's talked about same-sex relationships and how that correlates with a church specifically.
Yes. And
specifically with his church. He held an event. He had a lot of speakers at the event that would be considered open and affirming, maybe inclusive, and any kind of terminology you want to attach to that. But ultimately, what he really did is he gave handles to people that are walking through, whether it be with a child or whether it be yourself, a same-sex relationship or a gay relationship within the context of a church, which historically hasn't really gone hand in hand, right? So a lot of people are then asking questions, are you open and affirming? A lot of people are asking questions, where do you stand, right? And he has kind of walked through these waters of saying, I believe in people, right? I do think that a man and a woman being married is the best, right? I think that's the plan. But I also know that I love humans.
Yeah.
And I know that people are out there trying to find Jesus.
That statement has been so controversial in the church.
Right.
And theologically, we'll get into it, but theologically, he's not addressing any theological stance.
No.
He's saying, here's what I see in Scripture. Here's what I know to be true about God's love.
Right.
And so anyway, so he has this event.
He has an event. Yeah. And that event walks through those pieces. And you'll probably be able to walk into more detail of what that is and what it looked like and what he said. but people got really mad.
Yes.
And ultimately, like what I walked away with,
Church people got really mad.
church people got really mad. And what I walked away with watching it, I'm like, I just think this is helpful. It's helpful because it gives handles on how to get people closer to Jesus.
Yeah.
How's that hurtful?
Yeah.
Because we don't agree on this X, Y, or Z, or you think he might think that, or this is the way we interpret this and that. I'm like, people are hurting.
Yeah.
Like families are being ripped apart because of some theological idea or truth or whatever you want to say about those pieces because of a situation they find their kiddo in, which then takes them further away from the church and further away from Jesus than you would ever imagine. And I'm just like, I just don't feel like that's the win. I just don't see that in the Gospels where Jesus is entering the house of sinners and eating with these drunkards and people that they're like, oh, this is crazy, Jesus. Like, we love the sanitized version of Jesus for us in today's like modern times. But man, we love the radical Jesus of the Bible. So it's just confusing to me on that stuff. So I want to get your take on it. I want to get your take on the things that he said. And I want to get the take on kind of where that leads us, right? Like, what does that do for us?
Yeah. I mean, one, Andy has been a big model, I would say, for as far as church strategy, church model, church methods, because he's a video venue, multi-site church, and perhaps the best at it with the name North Point. So it's always been fun. I love his like what you mentioned, his holds tightly to mission, holds loosely to method.
And he did this in a very like tumultuous political season as well.
Yes.
Right? Came out with a book.
I forget the name of the book.
In It Not to Win It.
In It Not to Win It, yeah.
Great
book.
Oh,
great book.
So
we
good.
walked our board through that book about how do you pastor in a way where everyone wants you to be political, and how do you refuse to declare this is the political party of Jesus, right? And then how do you behave no matter what political party you're a part of?
Right.
How do you become Christ-like? Which was controversial,
right?
Which to me should be controversial that's controversial,
right?
But anyway, so Andy Stanley has been just solid. The challenge is he comes from Baptist. His dad is legendary, Charles Stanley, who just recently passed. Legendary pastor, and so even though his church is not denominationally mainline or Southern Baptist, his affiliation always has been, as far as relationally and connection and last name and all that. And so you have all these different perspectives on him. So when he does something that goes against part of the tribe, of whether it's a denomination or people who latch onto his love for mission, his Catalyst conferences or whatever, they liked him. And when he does something different, he gets a lot of backlash. Also, he's on one of the biggest stages, and so everything he says is dissected.
Like physically stage, or like
it is a huge one. I've seen it.
Is that is a pretty big stage?
It's big. I would not want to fall off of that thing.
Really?
Yeah. Oh no, it's 50 feet tall. I think. No, it's wide. I always get those mixed up. Anyway, so he has these. People are saying, "Hey, we want you to have a stance," and typically the people. When someone says, and we get this, one of the most common questions at North Point, is from people who are new at North Point. To me or to our team online would be, what is your stance on? And
fill in the blank.
Yeah, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
But typically I could almost fill in the blank for them. When that is coming from a Christian, it's typically... I want to make sure that this church aligns with, and a lot of times it would be my views on LGBTQ. And so, and I understand where that's coming from, because there's, we can go real technical. There's three types of churches out there. You got churches who are, the theological term or the church term would be open and affirming, which should be saying, hey, scripture is unclear, on relationships when it comes to sexual orientation. And so, any and all relationships that are in a, loving relationship are open. So it's open and affirming. And there are churches in Springfield area, obviously, like any area, most areas that are. There's churches that are closed and condemning, which is not their marketing. They don't say that, but it's just the experience of like, not only do we not believe that theologically, we're going to make sure that this comes up in as many services as possible. And nobody who disagrees with us will feel comfortable here. And I believe in Springfield area, you have plenty of options if you prefer that as well. And then you have welcoming and grace-filled churches that don't make this an issue, but theologically would not be open and affirming, but experientially would be welcome and loving, right? And that's where North Point has always been. And it's a challenge. That's where North Point Atlanta has always been. And so people who want them to take a stance, what they're saying is the stance is rarely satisfied when the pastor says, here's what I believe and here's how I'm going to guard my teaching. Because they're not saying we want to know your belief as a communicator or belief that guides the church. Just the word stance, I want to know your stance, is saying we want to know how you publicly position yourself. And when someone says, what's North Point's stance, it's not going to be the same as what's North Point's teaching, view, and value. So my stance is never going to be, you are not welcome. You do not fit. My stance is going to be everybody's welcome to the table. Everybody is wildly loved. Everybody is accepted. Now, our values and views are going to guide our teaching. That's going to be grace-filled, welcoming, and it's not going to promote something that doesn't go against the values of our church's view of Scripture, nor will we ever take a stance that unnecessarily divides or eliminates someone from hearing about Jesus. I think our views could impact some leadership roles. Obviously, they will in anything. Like, for example, let's talk about this. I have a view on tithing. I have a view on it. Matter of fact, I have a value on biblical generosity. I believe the Bible challenges us to have a view on generosity. I have a view on that. What is my stance on tithing? Well, you're not going to hear a mini sermon every time we give an offering at North Point. You're not going to hear me. You're not even going to hear me. I dare you to even pull up audio files.
Don't you dare me.
I'm not preaching tithing. I don't even preach 10%. What I do is I share when appropriate. Here's my view and here's our value of generosity. And I want you to think about that.
Oh, and it impacts our staff as well. Yep. I mean, we, as a staff.
Now, as a staff, it's not like a whatever you want to do. As a staff, it's we have a baseline expectation that every person on staff gives 10%. Right. Not because I believe that's what gets you into heaven, but that's our value.
Right.
I would never preach that on Sundays, on the weekends.
And as a staff,
that's not our mission.
I would hope we never get up there and talk about giving. And then at the end of it, be like, nah, I don't.
We don't believe. We don't have that.
I think it's going to be life-changing for you guys.
Right.
Now, I still haven't really bought onto it, right? But you guys, I'm telling you, life-changing. So there's that element too.
So no one comes to me and says, man, you guys are so judgmental, right? Is you make staff invest in your mission. I'm like, it's not being judgmental and it's not being hypocrites because I don't rail on people to give on the weekends. Is we invite people into generosity and into the mission. But no one's ever going to be prevented from attending or even serving at our church because they don't share our viewpoint on this value. Now, will there be limitations on that? Yeah, we're never going to pay you a salary based on people who give to the church if that's not something that you share a viewpoint on. That doesn't even make sense, right? But we're not going to market it. We're not going to make everybody do something that we have a strong value towards. When it comes to the church value and viewpoint, North Point's church value and viewpoint of sexuality, I know that a viewpoint and value of sexuality, of like looking at an interpretation of Scripture that we also realize can be interpreted differently, even in our own community within Christian churches. We see in Scripture the New Testament model. that seems to be obviously blessed is man, woman for life, right? So then there's great questions and debate and panels on what else out of silence might be blessed as well, right? What verses seem to be a clobber verse that say, no, it's condemned, it's an abomination if it goes outside of this. And so that's great debate and stuff. So that's why we don't take a stance of everybody who walks in this church must know clearly that it's, hey, we have some values. And the last thing I would do is invite someone to our leadership team to live out a value they don't share, right? And it's not being a hypocrite, it's not being a stance. So that's basically, when you look at the church landscape, those are oversimplification of three different ways churches do. They have views, values, and then do they make a public stance about it? Whatever. A lot of people want us to make a stance because they're more comfortable knowing not only does my leader believe this, I don't have to attend service with anyone who doesn't believe this as well. And at North Point, we fundamentally do not value everybody shares the same beliefs on everything. And that has never meant the leadership doesn't have a value and a viewpoint that is founded from a scriptural perspective. But what it means is, like when it comes to politically, is North Point Republican or Democrat? Who knows, right? Like I'm sure people will want to wonder as we get closer to next year. But it's not, our value is not making a stance. Some churches have a value. Our value is saying, hey, how do we live as followers of Jesus, in this world? And so some people just prefer that everyone thinks like them. That's never been the case at North Point. When it comes to sexuality, same thing. Andy Stanley, let's go back to Andy Stanley. So Andy Stanley has these classes, it really became a conference over time. Been doing it, I think, for 11 years, and then takes a lot of statements from other people because he's having this. Has he moved the church to open and affirming? And Andy's like, Here's what I've always been. Love people, share with them Jesus, give them helpful resources to encourage their family. If they're in a situation where it's complicated and confusing and they're in crisis right now, how do I help them? And he's never thought that doing that was a theological statement, but people are trying to hijack this and make it a theological statement. So then he had to cancel his weekend plans and just present that on the weekend. And even that, people are saying it's not good enough, it's not bold enough, it's not strong enough. And it's never changed from him. And why I think it's interesting is we're very similar. So for example, here's what I got out of it with Andy Stanley. Like, what a great idea to have a class of parents who are saying, hey, I never imagined myself growing up in the 80s and 90s or whenever the parents grew up, thinking that I would parent one day in Springfield, Missouri, and be wrestling with things with my kids when it comes to sexuality. And I find myself, my kids are having questions I was never prepared to have a conversation with. How meaningful and loving to have a class for these parents to say, hey, you're not alone, is how do we help give you tools to stay connected with your kid in this season that is probably the most important season for them to be connected with you? How do we have a class? And this is something I've talked with a couple of our youth pastors even recently. And since this is without trying to promote and create conversations that aren't already there, right? So that's trying to figure that out. Mm-hmm. But there are plenty of conversations that already exist. How do you have a class, a conversation with students who are wrestling with, whether they're feeling like this wrestle match with an identity, with an orientation, with an attraction, and to say, how do you keep connected with Jesus through this, right? Now, some people are uncomfortable even hearing that because they're like, you're promoting this. No, it is not a recruiting class. It's not a class that's saying, hey, we just want you to know Scripture says you just go, figure out things and call it good. We're just saying, hey, whatever you're wrestling with, if you come to a spot where you think this is a deal breaker for your relationship with Jesus, you need to put relationship with Jesus on hold while you figure out this part of your life that is very heavy to you right now. We want you to know that couldn't be further from the truth. Stay connected to Jesus And how do we keep parents connected to their kids and kids connected to Jesus in this world that is not the same as it was 30 years ago? And so for me, I feel like these are going to be conversations we have to have more of, and we will. Otherwise, we just make a statement, say, hey, if you wrestle with this, you don't belong here. As a parent, if you're wrestling with this, you did something wrong as a parent. You're a terrible parent, and you better shut up and figure out your family. And why most churches won't say that, they act like that. And we just won't do that.
I think it's a shame that I get a rap, I guess, I don't know, when I talk to people that I don't like church. And I do. And that's why I work at one. What I don't like...
I think history would say you believed in one.
Yeah. But here's the deal. I do get angsty about this stuff because I feel like when you talk to people about these types of issues, the one thing that they say when somebody gets into a space of something's changing, or I'm feeling this, or I don't know what to do with this, but I know that the one place I can't go is a church.
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand that. How have we become that, right? To where I'm like, when I read Jesus, that's what people were so attracted to, right? Like, I don't know what's going on. I have so many questions. I just have to find him, right? Yeah. And it just isn't that, and it is, I'm sure, but a lot of people that I talk to, it isn't that way. So I get super angsty with this stuff because I do get mad. I'm like, yeah. But again, that's why I work at a church, because I don't like that kind of a thing for people to think through. So I love this kind of a conversation of, no, we're here to help you, right? Yeah. We're here, like, I love what you talk about when you're not saying stance this, stance. People want certainty. That's what a stance provides. And you talk a lot about confidence and certainty and the difference between those. It's awesome. But what I'm at least certain and stance heavy on is that we're about restoration and transformation.
Yes.
I'm like, what does that look like?
Yes.
Let's just take a step with the parent. Let's just take a step with the kid. Let's just take a step with you. How do you get closer to Jesus? Full stop.
Yeah.
That's all. That's all I'm here for. Yeah. Right? Like, so it's just, I get very riled up because I just feel like we make it a lot hard. Life is hard. Jamie and I were in a small group. We're in a small group, still are, with a couple of people that aren't North Pointers.
How dare you?
I know. I'm so sorry. Sorry, Preston. I'm so sorry. But it was, the last one we had was like super heavy. And like I left and Jamie was like, what'd you think of that? I was like, did not like that at all. It felt like a wet blanket the whole time. Like it was just like, and I don't know.
You have a lot of experience with wet blankets.
I would imagine. It's just, so it's four couples. They're in different stages of life. And it's been awesome for them to invite us into it because they're probably 7-8 years older than we are. So we're just trying to learn. Like they've got kiddos that are going to college. They've got kiddos that are graduating high school. So we're just like trying to learn. And what's crazy is all three of them are going through these like really heavy pieces, right? So Jamie and I left that conversation in that group thinking like, without all of this other stuff that we're talking about right now, life is already heavy.
Yeah.
And what the church does a really good job of is making other things feel super heavy. And where Jesus is saying like, my burden's light, right? Yeah. And what does that mean? Like it means that there's hope in him and there's like freedom in him. But somehow like the church puts all of these like obstacles up and roadblocks, right? And Paul even says like, don't make it harder. Yes. Don't make it harder. What are you doing? You're making it harder. So I like these conversations. I love the way that you lead. I love the way that you provide clarity and that you also provide an openness for people to come in and explore, okay, what does that mean for me, right? And the clarity that you provide is like, we're heading to Jesus. Like that's where we're heading. That's where we're heading. Now, how we get there is going to be so messy. I get it, but you're up for the mess, and that's why I respect you. Like I love that aspect of it. So, to somebody out there that might be new to North Point and asking those questions, or might be listening to the Riff, and they're like, I don't know why you'd be listening to the Riff, and you're like, I don't really go to church. I mean, we are viral. I get it. I get it. But to those people that aren't really connected in a way that they could be because they have felt like it's not a place for them, or they're upset because it might be a place for them, right? Or whoever that them is, what would you say to them?
Well, I think we need to do a part 2 episode on this because
my
I've got a
goodness.
lot more riff in me here.
Really?
So I think we carry it over. So I don't want to leave anything unanswered because we'll just record and release next week. Second, because there's so much that you just talked about that I'm passionate about.
Well, and a question too, and we talked a little bit about this, but I think we can wrap it in, is diversity of thought.
Yes.
And we talk about like, when does unity and unification, how do those like when is diversity of thought helpful? When is it hurtful? All of this kind of stuff, right? I think wraps up into this kind of a conversation.
Yeah, I feel like I want to continue. I want to continue this. I want to talk about this idea of unity and what's our church. I want to talk about stances, but I would say to wrap up today, just for something for us to think about, is dehumanization has been a big deal throughout history to give you license, to give one license to treat someone with less dignity. Whether we're talking back in the Nazi regime with the caricatures of Jews, whether it was Americans dealing with African-American civil rights issues, to dehumanize someone is to say, hey, you don't even have all the emotions that a real human have. You just have the animal primary emotions. And now I feel better treating you differently because I really feel like you're less than. And I believe in this setting, a lot of even people who would consider themselves to be Christians, and I don't even like to say Christians, would dehumanize people who don't share the same thoughts of them when it comes to sexuality. And if you're sitting here saying, man, what is the theological conversation? Well, let's keep having the theological. I have no problem with the theological conversation. Matter of fact, I said earlier in this show, is this a show? I don't know if it's a show.
I'd consider it a show. Yeah,
okay.
There's music.
But theologically, we have a fairly, if you look at all of Christendom, it's not atypical to a fairly conservative interpretation of Scripture. We just have a very, very grace-filled way of communication and focusing on the love of Jesus. What you're never going to hear is a promotion of something that our church leadership does not view matches with Scripture. When it comes to sexuality, I would say you're never going to hear a promotion of any type of sexual life that goes against what we see in New Testament, right? At the same time, you're not going to see a lot of condemnation for anything. There's so much stuff and there's so many ways to look at Scripture, which I think is fascinating. I agree that even though where I land theologically, there's other people within Christendom that see it differently. And that's fine. But North Point is going to be a place that is based on Scripture, and that there will be spots where, like, I'm going to guard communication to make sure that we never are sloppy in our meaning, that we never say anything that is mean or is rude or goes against our mission. At the same time, we'll also guard that we never say anything that is untrue according to Scripture. And both those things create this beautiful tension that allow anybody to be invited to the table and everybody to be challenged to grow. So theologically, that's who I am. That's who North Point is. And then experientially, I hope someone who's never even considered the Bible to be a lens by which they view their sexuality, and people who have made the Bible their dating handbook, which I'd be very careful what part of the Bible you're using as your dating handbook. Okay, there's some nasty stories in there, but that everywhere in between would be challenged to hear from Jesus and to respond. So here's what I would say as we land today's episode is, one, if our gospel is not loving, then it is not gospel. If our gospel is not truth, it is not gospel. So I need to be gripped with both of those things if I want to follow Jesus. Is it based on Scripture? And is it dripping with love? And so when I discover something I believe is true, and it's called a personal conviction, if I make a public projection of a personal conviction, I now am robbing truth of love, right? So if you're a follower of Jesus, you have to be loving, curious, kind, compassionate, period. We know that. It talks way more about that in Scripture than it does about sexuality, okay? The other thing is, if you're following Jesus and you're like, sexuality, you mean Jesus has a plan for sexuality? Like I'd be like, yeah, come and see. Invite him in. Ask him to talk to you, right? I just feel all of that, and there's room for a mess. There's room for growth. There's room for challenge, and there's room for grace. And when we do that, if you've got to be at a church where you're like, we don't care how people handle their relationships, North Point's not for you. Now you can attend, right? Like that's great, but we're not going to preach like it doesn't matter. If you need to be at a church where everybody must know the stance of a church on, LGBTQ, North Point ain't for you. Good news is you live in Springfield. But if you're willing to go to a church that says, you know what, our leadership is not void of values that they find right from Scripture, but they're going to operate in such a way we're willing to be judged by who we welcome. Jesus was accused not because of what he taught, but because of who he taught it to and hung out with and the people that were drawn to him. He was accused of being a glutton, not because he always outdrank everybody. He was accused of being a sinner and filled with a demon, not because he was, but because who was drawn to him. And his truth was truth. And so here's what it tells me. We will never speak enough truth to satisfy judgmental Christians. The other thing is, if we're afraid of being accused by whom we welcome, we're in the wrong business. So anyway, let's talk more about it. Let's keep filming here. Let's have something for next week. I want to talk more about sexuality. I want to talk about more about stances. I want to talk about more about, as a leadership, what do we demand out of our team? And what do we want to see in our community? How do we help parents? How do we help students? How do we help people who are in navigating? What do I do? And I think it's going to be more normative as we go forward, these conversations. So love that we're having it. Yeek. Okay. Hey,
welcome to the table, South Africa.
Yeah. What language does South Africa speak primarily?
I feel like we should know this if we're going to want to.
I think it's English.
You think it's English?
I think it is.
Well, then we got it down.
Yeah.
All right. I know English.
Hey, thanks for letting us borrow extra time from your day today. And if you hated this episode, just skip next week too, because it's gonna be some more of that. So we got some more built up. All right. Talk to you later.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Riff. We'll have a brand new episode every week, wherever you find podcasts.